On today's episode, we will be chatting with the head of DMU, which is the Disaster and Management Unit of the Port of Spain Corporation. He will now introduce himself and let us know about the roles and functions of the Disaster and Management Unit.
Hi, I am Affonso and I am the Disaster Management Coordinator of the Disaster Management Unit at the Port of Spain City Corporation.
Mr. Affonso, thank you for joining us today. I'd like to start off by asking you, what are the key roles and functions of the Disaster and Management Unit?
Thank you for having me. The key functions of the Disaster Management Unit revolve around the disaster preparedness cycle, which there are 4 phases to the cycle: preparation and poor planning, mitigation, recovery, and response.
Right.
So all our activities are really geared towards those 4 phases and managing those 4 phases. In terms of the preparation, we tend to do outreach and sensitization sessions, training sessions with burgesses, members of staff, businesses. We really need to try to focus on building that capacity across the city and across citizens of the country. The preparation and mitigation kind of align. The mitigation is where we try to reduce the impact of losses. So we try to engage in infrastructural projects and see what could be done so that we could reduce the losses and impact on residents or across the city. Response is the third phase, which comes immediately after or post-event. It usually lasts from a few days to maybe a few weeks, and in very extenuating circumstances, months. So the response is where we actually provide relief and relief items, whether it's tarpaulin, mattresses, sandbags in some cases. Sandbags tend to come before for preparation and mitigation, but it could also come after, depending on the level or the extent of the damage. And the longer term recovery is where you now have that ability or that phase where you plan and you continue to plan and prepare and you rebuild. Underscoring all of these phases of the disaster management cycle, we've been building in resiliency components, so that the response and recovery phases are shorter, more efficient, and more effective.
Yes. So can you tell me what skills one has to encompass to be a disaster management field officer?
Okay, to be a disaster management field officer, you need to take a lot of initiative. You need to be very strong on communication, because in times of a disaster, even in times of preparation, proper planning helps and is more effective when it is that you have good communication, strong communication skills.
Yes.
The initiative will fall under leadership, your ability to lead and lead yourself as well, motivate yourself, because during a disaster you don't always have that element of leadership constantly present. So you need to be able to find that motivating factor, that driving factor in yourself.
Yes.
And one of the key factors in terms of being a field officer is the fact that they enjoy what they do. They enjoy providing that assistance, that support to people, not just in times of a disaster, but just in general. They enjoy having that relationship and maintaining amiable relationships, because post-disaster, post-response, you tend to find that field officers have very strong relationships with burgesses.
Yes.
So that when they see them, even on the field, outside of a disaster time, a disaster event, they maintain that relationship. There's a level of familiarity.
Yes.
And it helps when it is that you have that familiarity with people within the community.
Yes.
It makes the response times, it makes the responses easier and faster.
Yes.
That's for field officers. I am the disaster management coordinator. The coordinator has more of an administrative function.
Right.
So the structure of the unit is where you have 1 coordinator, 2 field officers, 1 communication technician, and the communication technician intercepts and traps the information. Traps the information via radios from within our local government network, our ODPM network, and even she manages the hotline.
Right.
So that's very valuable information that she will collate and pass along to me or to the field officers, so that we could respond in a very quick time. So I tend to, my responsibility is more administrative.
Right.
So I will then do up all the reports and assist with letters, recognizing that there are times that you have to manage your position and understanding that the responsibility is a shared responsibility.
Right.
Sometimes you have to put on your boots and go outside with your staff
Yes.
and do the work with them alongside them.
Yes.
That is a significant factor in driving that motivation and in keeping their motivation levels up. Seeing that it's not just about doing desk work,
Yes.
but that there is that support in the field. So very often I will join them in the field whenever it is that we have reports that are too many for two people to handle, and it also assists in providing relief to residents and burgesses, because the longer you take to respond to burgesses, the more they feel as though they're left out.
Right.
And in times of a disaster, you don't want to feel as though you're being neglected.
Exactly.
And us being a part of the corporation, we have that responsibility to support our burgesses, to be
Yes.
there for our burgesses.
Yes.
So we try our best that within a few hours, within no more than 24 hours, we would respond to a disaster.
Right.
The first thing we do is that once we have a point of contact,
Right.
we make contact with the burgess.
Right.
Either myself or one of the field officers, or even the communication technician. When she's trapping the information, she will take basically a report.
Right.
Name, contact information, address, and a detail of what the event is.
Right.
Sometimes the burgess can't always provide that detailed event because of the situation that they're in and the urgency of their situation. But once we get that information, we then make contact with them to determine the severity and the level of need, and if it warrants an immediate or a managed response.
Okay, so in terms of, I just heard you said burgesses.
Yes.
So say for instance, I'm a burgess and I would like to volunteer. How does one become a volunteer?
That's a great question. So in terms of our field, even though we're considered as part of the first responder corps in relation, first responders could be fire, police, us.
Right.
First responders in actual emergency response are actually neighbors.
Yes.
They're the people who are on site, they're there, they're immediate, they respond, they support.
Right.
So what the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government has been advocating and pushing very strongly and highly on its mandate is the fact that there's a need to build volunteer capacity
Yes.
nationally. So there is a community emergency response training course
Okay.
that is carried out by the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government in partnership with the Trinidad and Tobago Red Cross.
Okay.
This is done periodically, and if it is that you monitor our Facebook pages or social media pages,
Yes.
you would find the information available. It comes up maybe every 2 to 3 months.
Okay. The cycle.
The cycle, the
Right.
training cycle, yes. It's available to all nationals, young and old.
Okay.
So there's no limitation on becoming a volunteer.
That's great information to know. What steps would one take when preparing an emergency response plan?
If it is that you're starting an emergency response plan from scratch,
Right.
the first best place to start would be research. Research, because in many cases and in many instances, response plans, emergency response plans, ERPs, have already been drafted. So
Right.
sometimes you don't need to start from scratch and you don't need to try to reinvent the wheel. So there are other jurisdictions, whether it's Trinidad, regional corporations have already done, and similar entities,
Yes.
public and private, already have emergency response plans or similar type emergency response plans. So you start from that point of research, finding out and basically doing an analysis of what already exists.
Right.
So that when you then take that document or you find a document that you can work with, you tweak it and you tailor it.
Right.
So after that process of tweaking and tailoring is where you then start to operationalize it, or you test it, so to speak. So in testing it, you have to first have consultations.
Right.
So you have your consultations with either administration or your external parties. Sometimes, depending on, for instance, us, our external parties could vary from civil society organizations to other public and private sector organizations.
Right.
So in having that consultation, you find out what can work, what can't work, and what is realistic.
Right.
Because in times of a disaster, in times of an emergency, we won't be the only individuals or the only group or entity that is responsible for the emergency.
Right.
It tends to fall on the shoulders of many.
Okay.
So it's an understanding our shared responsibilities that outside of the disaster, outside of the emergency, that we can understand better how we can be best prepared during the emergency.
Right.
So it's going through that phase of starting off with your research, tweaking it, having your consultations, and feel free to have your consultations with the public as well, because
Yes.
the public as well need to understand, the stakeholders need to understand the benefits of an emergency
Yes.
response plan to them. And they also need to understand their role in an emergency response plan.
Yes.
Because it's an understanding that we can all share and manage this responsibility properly.
Yes. So, you know, as the saying goes, prevention is better than cure.
It is.
So, in terms of the proper PPE, what is the list of PPE a disaster management officer must have before going on the field or while on the field?
Things have changed, and they've changed considerably, but some things have remained constant as well.
Right.
So in terms of our PPE, we have steel-toe puncture-proof boots. That's one of the most important assets
Right.
that we've had even pre-COVID. The reason being is because the terrain that we go in and some of the assessments that we have to do, sometimes they're house fires and we don't know if there's a piece of wood with a nail sticking out. So that's why they're puncture-proof, steel-toe. We need to protect our feet.
Yes.
Now in the COVID environment, we maintain our adherence to the COVID-19 regulations and guidelines.
Right.
Proper physical distancing, even when in times of a disaster and disaster response.
Right.
So that sometimes they're individuals, based on our geography, there are multiple households on a property.
Right.
We still have to maintain that physical distancing
True.
even while doing assessments. So physical distancing, proper sanitization. If we have our gloves available, disposable gloves, we use them.
Yes.
They aren't always readily available, so we at least ensure that there's proper sanitization of our surfaces and our hands,
Yes.
and whatever items it is we need. If it is that we use pens, sometimes we have to lend the resident our pen, so we make sure to sanitize everything before and after.
Right.
So those are the three. Those are the key things in terms of our PPE.
Right.
In addition to our masks,
Right.
face masks, gloves if we have it. If we don't, definitely hand sanitizer.
Yes.
Hand sanitizers are constant,
Right.
and the puncture-proof boots.
Okay.
Puncture-proof steel-toe boots.
Are helmets or goggles or anything like that necessary?
Helmets and goggles are already assigned,
Okay.
and so each field officer does have a pair of helmets, a pair of goggles, a pair of galoshes,
Right.
or rubber boots. And even the suspenders, waders, as we refer, the waders tend to come all the way up and give you some coverage,
Right.
up to about your waist.
Yes.
So those are also part of the PPE package.
Yes.
Yeah, but those will come in based on the circumstances and
Right.
the situation
On
that
the
you're
situation.
responding to.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Stefan, can you tell us what have you done to improve the knowledge base of your disaster management officers over the past year?
So over the past year, even before the past year, we've all registered with FEMA, and FEMA offers free disaster management courses or courses related to disaster management.
Right.
So it's through FEMA that we've been able to continue our own personal and professional development in the field of disaster management and response. Something that I've been encouraging my staff to do is focus on the humanitarian component of it. And there's another website, Disaster Relief. They also provide courses on humanitarian, building your competencies and capabilities
Right.
in understanding your response during a disaster, focusing on humanitarian aspects or components.
Okay. All right. And also, in terms of collaborating, can you tell me or describe a time where you have collaborated with external entities to improve the operations of the disaster management unit?
Yeah, actually a few weeks ago when we had the floods in Port of Spain, coming out of it, I had to coordinate with a number of agencies, CPEP, Ministry of Works, other regional corporations, because there was fortunately an all-of corporation approach,
Right.
where other corporations provided some of their assets, trucks, backhoes, skid steers, water trucks,
Right.
and that was necessary to help restore the functions of the city, particularly
Yes.
because City Gate was heavily impacted.
Yes.
Coming out of that, a few weeks after, like about 2 weeks after, I had a stakeholders meeting with everyone,
Right.
so that I could take their feedback. That was the closest that I could have gotten to having what we refer to as like a whitewash,
Right.
which is basically like a briefing session to understand what were the challenges from the various stakeholders,
Yes.
and how we could move forward in improving. And it's in taking that that I'm going to improve and make amendments to our emergency response plan,
Yes.
in addition to our egress plan to the city of Port of Spain.
And I know working in this field is a lot of pressure. So how do you manage working under pressure, and tying into that your challenges with, say for instance, getting John public to understand how to be prepared?
So to start, it's not pressure.
Okay.
It's work when you're not having fun, and I have fun.
Right.
It's not the kind of fun that you have at a water park,
Right.
but I enjoy what I do.
Yes.
I enjoyed responding and coordinating the assets in response to the flood.
Right.
I enjoy being able to assist people and provide them in the direction. So even though the Port of Spain Corporation is not the entity to provide grants,
Right.
I like being able to provide people with the information so that they can access grants, whether it's from social development or
Yes.
self-help or even HDC.
Right.
And in relation to the second question, which was
For John public.
for John Public, it's difficult to try to get everyone to be on the same page,
Right.
but it doesn't mean that we don't try.
Right.
During COVID-19, or as a result of COVID-19, we've had to pull back our public outreach sensitization sessions.
Yes.
And I'm glad to have this interview with you here now, because it means that the information that we've had
Yes.
sitting down can now be recirculated.
Yes.
It's difficult to be able to circulate flyers and handouts on earthquake preparedness, a natural hazard
Yes,
preparation and natural hazard
hurricanes.
impacts,
Yes.
hurricanes, flooding, because
yes.
people are very, very cautious,
Yes.
or even paranoid of receiving items that they don't know the source.
Right.
It could have COVID, they could get contaminated, and we have to understand and respect that, and we do.
Right.
So in terms of our outreach, we still do outreach and training on a virtual scale, on a virtual level.
Yes.
So whenever it is that we have engagements and public engagement, engagements are now virtual engagements.
Right.
So it's virtual public engagements.
Right.
Yeah.
I gather from these interviews that you are so passionate about what you do, and I would like to find out from you what inspires you and what has interested you firstly into becoming a disaster management field officer at the Port of Spain. Well, not at the Port of Spain Corporation, but in general. What is your inspiration?
As the disaster management coordinator, one of the things that has been consistent throughout my career has been interacting with people and doing things that I can improve, doing things that improve the lives of people around me.
Right.
And in 2017, I left the army, and I won a Fulbright scholarship.
You were
and
in the
I went
army?
Yes, I
Okay.
was.
Interesting.
And I went abroad to study, and I came back. So I was basically job hunting.
Right.
But this constant element of trying to, of maintaining that relationship with people,
Right.
focus on individual development, community development remains strong.
Yes.
And when this opportunity came up, I jumped at it and I prayed.
Yes.
And I was successful, and I've been here for the past 2 years, continuing with that mandate of serving the people,
Yes.
making their lives better, making our communities better, and in this case, making the city better,
Yes.
our city.
Yes. Describe for me a full day in the life of a disaster management coordinator.
There is no set routine. Some days I can focus on administration in terms of preparing letters, making sure reports are done, and other days I am in meetings, back-to-back meetings with either stakeholders or our own internal corporation meetings.
Yes.
Some days I have to support my staff in the field.
Yes.
So there are days that you can find a balance, and there are days that balance just doesn't exist.
Yes.
And it's in that nature of the unpredictability that I enjoy the corporation and what I do, this field. The fact that every day is not the same, it's not predictable, it's not boring, it's not monotonous.
Yes.
It's the opposite. It's
Yes.
dynamic, it's fluid, it requires versatility. And it's in that environment and in this environment that I've thrived. I've
Yes.
enjoyed every single day working with the corporation.
Yes. So we've come to the last question, and this question I thoroughly enjoy asking all my interviewers because it gives a insight of what the corporation and how the corporation has impacted you. So what is the most favorite or most memorable thing about working at the Port of Spain Corporation?
Oh, I would have to go back to that point of the versatility of the environment, the versatility and the dynamism of the job.
Yes.
That in interacting with my co-workers, the other divisions, administration, the environment is a dynamic environment, and you learn a lot from interacting with people, and I enjoy interacting with people. But the reality of not of a versatile environment where things change and they can change quickly in disaster response and disaster management, and coming back to the initial cycle, which was where we would have started of preparation, mitigation, response and recovery.
Yes.
In that you need to be fluid, and it's just as in my daily job, it's just as in working with the corporation that I enjoy that fluidity. That some days within a day, I could be in the field, I could be in a meeting, I could be in the office, and maybe even return to any one or more of the others.
Yes.
Within the same work day.
Yes.
Additionally, as the disaster management coordinator and the unit, we work or we're available 24/7. So
Right.
our hours may be fixed in the office generally,
Yes.
which should usually be Monday to Friday, 8 to 4.
Right.
But when a Burgess is impacted on a Friday afternoon, Saturday evening, Sunday evening,
Right.
we don't say, well, we'll wait till Monday morning. We understand and we appreciate the urgency of the situation,
Yes.
and we respond.
Yes.
And it's in that dedication to service that we consistently and constantly find and maintain our purpose.
Yes.
So it's in that dynamism, that fluidity, that versatile environment that I enjoy being a part of the corporation, and I enjoy doing what I do, what we do.
So I just want to thank you for being a part of this interview, and it was quite informative. So thanks once again.
Thank you, Halcyon. Pleasure.
And that concludes this week's episode of Know Your Corporation. Thank you for joining us. Stay tuned to our next episode where we will highlight another department.